Norway Chess 2025 has begun. This is the strongest classical tournament of the year, with the top 5 in the world playing, plus Wei Yi, who's pretty close to that number 6 spot. So listen, I'll talk more about the lineup in a second. I want to plunge straight into the game between Magnus Carlsen, the world number 1 classical player, against Gukesh Domaraju, world champion. So what a matchup we've got in this very first round. So time control is 2 hours on the clock, but increment only kicks in at move 40, and it's only 10 seconds. So that's actually quite fast. Carlsen goes for the Jabava London system, which is reasonably respectable. But he was in for a surprise. The normal move here, normal continuation, is to exchange on d4. But Gukesh went for bishop g4. Now f3 is probably the principal move here. But this can get very sharp indeed. And it's not a beautiful move playing f3 because it slightly weakens the e3 point. Gukesh played that very quickly. No doubt he was very well prepared following his World Championship match. So Carlsen decided to play a very tame move, bishop e2. And after this exchange, then black really doesn't have any difficulties in the opening at all. Knight ce2 from Carlsen. That's a good move because often that knight on c3 is poorly placed. But you can see that black is able to set up this nice solid pawn chain, and there's no blocked bishop on c8. So black's development is very easy here. And I would say that basically black has equalized already here. This knight's spinning around to the king side, but there's not a lot for it to do here. You can see those squares are covered. And here is where Carlsen starts to get a little bit creative. Instead of castling, he plays queen e2 and then rook d1. Perhaps he's angling for e4 very quickly. Well, let's see. Queen a5. Well, given that the king is still in the middle, then reasonable move. A little bit of pressure on this diagonal. Also gains a tempo by hitting the a pawn. Rook d8. Yep. The rook comes to the middle, so that basically e4 is not going to happen here. Carlsen went for h4. Well, it gains a little bit of space. I mean, this is an attacking gesture, but it's nothing special. Queen a4. Yeah, looks at the light squares. Looks very nice. Carlsen slams the knight onto the outpost, but that gets exchanged, and there's not too much going on here. Queen a6 from Gukesh. Pretty sensible move. Carlsen could exchange, but this endgame is quite dry. It doesn't really matter about the double-deck pawns. You know, something like this a pawn can be used very well, just putting it on h4, and then later this pawn on b2 could be a target. That's probably what Carlsen should do, or at least perhaps just advance the h-pawn and allow the queens to be exchanged, and it's about equal. But instead he plays more ambitiously, queen f3. So now we get sharp because white can't castle for the moment. Bishop d6 played by Gukesh. I mean, that bishop could have potential on the king side. Carlsen plays the knight to h5. Yeah, a little bit menacing. And I would say that Carlsen wouldn't be too unhappy with this position. I think coming back here, maybe bishop d6 wasn't completely necessary. Black could play queen b5 just to put a bit of pressure on the b2 pawn. But anyway, we've got to this position. Gukesh thought for 15 minutes here, and he had plotted this sharp pawn sacrifice. And I find this a very revealing moment in the game. I think it reveals the player's styles. You know, Gukesh, keen to complicate, after pawn takes pawn, queen g6 starts to get very sharp. It's probably quite reasonable for white, but that's more Gukesh's style. But instead, Carlsen just drops back with the queen, threatening mate in 1, and that's parried by queen g6. And Carlsen is happy to go into an endgame. That's more his style. He can see a very slight structural weakness here. That pawn has been taken away from the centre, but the position is still roughly level. Gukesh exchanges and plays c4. So now there's some imbalance. So Carlsen has a majority of pawns in the centre. He would love to be able to push through with f3 and e4 and perhaps bring the king up in support. Takes a little bit of time to do that. In the meantime, Gukesh has counterplay on the queen side with this nice pawn majority. Very nice idea from Carlsen now. Instead of going directly for a push in the centre with e4, he first of all deals with this queenside pawn majority. So both pawns hit, knight f6, so this is protected, and if knight takes, then black would break through on b2. So instead Carlsen played rook b1. Then this is very clever. Rook b8, so that had to be protected. Carlsen goes for f3, taking these squares away from the knight and looking perhaps later on to push. a5, so Gukesh looking to get that majority going, but here is what Carlsen has prepared. b4. So he's preventing black from playing b4. And if pawn takes pawn on b4, rook b4, and you can see there's a lot of pressure here. And that's pleasant for white because the second rook will be able to come across. So Gukesh correctly exchanged. And you can see this is obviously this broken up black's pawns. That spearhead on c4 has gone and there's pressure here. So that has to be advanced, b4. An exchange and rook takes b4. Now, white doesn't want to exchange here because, well, this rook isn't yet in play. So rook a3. Now, if white could stabilize here, if white had, 2 or 3 spare moves, bring the king to d3 to support these points, e3 and the knight, and shift the rook across, then white would stand very well. These are 2 isolated pawns that need attention. But it's black's move here, and Gukesh is able to create counter chances with rook e8, threatening that pawn. King steps up and rook b2 check, and rook takes g2. So he finds counterplay just in time, and the pawns are level 4 against 4. I mean, structurally, still, I would say a little bit better for white. If white can get this going, then, those centre pawns look pretty good. Obviously, double pawns here. But black has enough play. And instead of falling back, defending this pawn with rook d8, Gukesh plays well. He plays rook g3, hitting the f pawn. So that's defended. And g5. So he's getting rid of that double pawn, playing actively. It's his sharp play. If Carlsen takes on d5, then black is going to have enough counterplay here with this active h pawn and the rook really active as well. Won't be possible for white to advance in the centre. So Carlsen exchanges and the rook protects d5. Rook a1, and Gukesh has found counterplay. Now, rook a8, position simplifying down, and Carlsen goes for e4. And that's exchanged. Now, this is move 40. At this point, the 10-second increment kicks in. But that's not much time, not much added time. And both players had invested most of their 2 hours. So effectively, they were pretty much playing on the increment, just 10 seconds, a bit more than that. But this is not a simple position to play when you're very short of time. Now, if Carlsen wants to draw here, then he could simply exchange knights. I mean, that forces an exchange of knights. But with so few pawns, that will inevitably lead to a draw. It's a challenge black. But we know what Magnus is like. He wants to maintain as much pressure as possible. So he keeps the pieces on the board. And these pawns are impressive. They could roll down the board. However, Gukesh has counterplay in the form of the h-pawn. So it's getting very sharp here. And, well, as I always say, the secret of good technique is good calculation. The problem is, calculating is extremely difficult when you don't have time. You need time to crunch through variations. And this is very tricky. Gukesh makes, for me, what looks like an extraordinary decision. He plays h3. Now, he had calculated this, but he'd invested a lot of time in playing this move. He could play knight h5, and arguably that's a safer move, although perhaps it's simply too late to make a safe move here. He went for h3. So he'd calculated this line. Pawn takes knight, h2, f7. So both players about to make a new queen here. And rook g3 check, he threw in a check. King d2, that's actually a really necessary move. If king c4, then this actually wins for black. If queen c5, the rook hangs, and otherwise the king moves and that knight is hanging. So Carlsen had to step back. Now, I mean, this is tricky for both sides. Both sides really short of time. Both players made a queen. Right. Here is where I would like you to have a think, and I'm going to have a drink. You've got, well, how much time did Gukesh have here? Not that much time. I mean, I think it was something like 30 seconds, maybe a little bit more, for this move. And you have to get it right. Basically, there is only one move that draws for black, and the rest loses, although it's very hard to determine how and why. Okay, black to play. Cheers. Gukesh played queen h6 check. This loses with best play. Rook g2 should draw. I mean, Carlsen has to be careful here. With the queen and rook attacking, the good news is for white that, I mean, Carlsen can dance around this knight, and actually that saves white. So, for example, here. Now, king c4 would lose. We've seen that position before. So the king has to step back and check. If the king goes up, then this is just a draw. Still got to be careful, but that will lead to a draw. And the king goes back, and yeah, this is a draw. It's basically the position is going to repeat like this, and so on. But I would say that is not an obvious move. As when you're short of time, it's just impossible to calculate properly. Gukesh played queen h6 check. There's only one move that wins here, and that's king c2. Queen g6 check, king b2. Queen b6 check. Now be careful, if the king goes to a3, then rook takes check. Would not be very pleasant for white. King a2. And now black's checks are starting to look a little bit thin on the ground. Rook g2. King steps up. Queen b2. King a4. Now if queen a1, then the king just steps back in front of the knight, and that wins. That knight is a beautiful defender. So Gukesh at this moment played queen takes c3. Wow. The sword of Damocles is hanging over both players' heads. Now it was Carlsen's turn to check. Rook a6. This is a killer. If king f7, then queen h5 wins for white. If g6, queen h7. If king e7, then queen e5. Oh man, for example. That's the end. The game went king f5. Still got to get it right. Rook e6. If king d3, queen f3 wins. The rook hangs. And, well, this is where the game finished. Gukesh resigned. If king d5, well, let's take it through to mate. And rook c6. Well, once again, we see Magnus Carlsen showing extraordinary determination to win. And yeah, once again, he ground it out in an endgame. But, well, he's on form. You know, you need to move quickly, you need to think quickly. And Gukesh just cracked right at the end. Actually, you could say that this was Gukesh's only blunder in the game. Only blunder. You can question his judgment in, you know, was it the right kind of position to go for? But essentially, objectively, this is his only mistake in the game. And Carlsen capitalised and won. So there we go. The world number one defeats the world champion, but that was close. In the other games, we had Hikaru Nakamura, who defeated Fabiano Caruana. Hikaru showing how strong he is when the position, when the position simplifies and his opponent is short of time. Nakamura showed superb technique, and Wei Yin, Arjun Erigaisi drew their classical game. Erigaisi won the Armageddon very convincingly, actually. Well, a fascinating first round in Norway Chess. More coming your way soon. I'll try and cover all rounds. And just to say, I'm going to be doing another Patreon-only broadcast this Friday, which is actually the free day in Norway Chess by coincidence. And I will be doing another masterclass for, I repeat, patrons only. So if you want to sign up, then do check out the link to my Patreon site, patreon.com/PowerPlayChess. Sign up and you'll be able to join in the masterclass on Friday. It's fully interactive and the subject is going to be calculation. This game is very relevant. Hope you enjoyed that. Thanks for watching. See you later.